The moment I clicked play on the CCTV footage, my life flipped from mundane to a full-blown crisis. I installed those cameras because of the break-ins down the street, never imagining they'd unveil a break-in of a different kind, a betrayal. Julia had been working late a lot, or so she said. Community events, extra shifts at the library, her reasons were endless. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But, then, her phone started acting like a top-secret document, always on silent, always just out of reach. That nagging doubt started to eat at me, whispering louder each day, something's off. That evening, the alert pinged on my phone. Motion detected in your living room. Expecting to see a stray cat we'd been feeding, what I saw instead gutted me. There was Julia, my Julia, laughing and leaning into a kiss with someone who definitely wasn't me. His name, I'd later learn, was Thomas. The scene, seared into my memory, replayed on multiple nights' footage. I felt like I was suffocating, my heart squeezed by a vice of betrayal. But I needed undeniable proof, something concrete. Digging through her purse felt like the ultimate betrayal on my part, yet the receipts for dinners, the little gifts, the hotel bookings screamed the truth I couldn't deny any longer. The confrontation was inevitable. Julia, we need to talk, I said, my voice a mix of rage and heartbreak as I confronted her with the evidence. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, crumbled before me, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Mike. It was a mistake, it meant nothing, I swear. Her pleas for forgiveness, her admissions of a mistake, they clashed with the cold, hard evidence of her betrayal. My world, once secure and predictable, had shattered into a million pieces, each reflecting the lie my life had become. The lock clicked into place with a finality that echoed the shattering of my trust. I'd just kicked Julia out, the woman I pledged my life to, because she decided ours wasn't enough. Standing in the doorway, watching her plead through tears, I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. Please, Mike, we can fix this, she sobbed, but her betrayal was a chasm too wide to bridge. There's nothing left to fix, Julia, I said, closing the door on us, on everything we'd built. Driven by a fury I couldn't quench. I did something I never thought I'd do. I sent the CCTV footage to Thomas's wife. If my world was going to fall apart, I wasn't going down alone. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Thomas confronted me the next day, his face a mask of rage. You've ruined my life, he bellowed, shoving me hard against my car in the company parking lot. My coworkers' eyes were on us, a mixture of shock and curiosity painting their faces. It didn't take long for fists to fly, for the accumulated pain and betrayal to manifest into physical blows. We were a tangle of rage and desperation, fighting for all we'd lost, until the wail of police sirens broke through the haze. Handcuffed and humiliated, we were carted off for public disturbance, a new low in my rapidly unraveling life. The news spread like wildfire, a juicy scandal for our small community to feast on. Did you hear about Mike and Julia? Became the whisper on everyone's lips, a stain on our reputations we'd never wash off. Julia, caught in the crossfire of our private war, lost her job at the library. The place she loved, her refuge from the chaos of our failing marriage, gone because of the scandal. Sitting in that cold, sterile police station, it hit me, my quest for revenge hadn't just hurt Julia and Thomas, it had obliterated the remnants of the life I once knew. The cost of my anger was higher than I'd ever imagined, leaving me to wonder if any of it was worth it. The world seemed to shrink around me, my life condensing into a single, burning focus. Revenge. It consumed me, gnawing at the edges of my sanity, pushing away the friends who tried to pull me back from the brink. Mike, this isn't you, they'd say, but they didn't understand. The betrayal wasn't theirs to forgive. Julia, meanwhile, found refuge with a friend willing to overlook her transgressions. I knew because I couldn't help myself. I tracked her, watched her, desperate for some sign of remorse, some indication that she felt even a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on me. But life, it seemed, moved on for her. She even landed a job at a bookstore, a fresh start I begrudgingly acknowledged she was entitled to. Work became an afterthought, my performance slipping through my fingers like sand. The warning from my boss jolted me, a stark reminder of the real-world consequences of my vendetta. Shape up, Mike, or you're out. His words echoed in my head, a lifeline I wasn't sure I wanted to grasp. In the midst of my self-imposed exile, a mutual friend, playing the peacemaker, suggested counseling. It could help you both, she urged, her optimism a stark contrast to my bitterness. But the thought of sitting across from Julia, discussing our feelings as if they could mend what was broken, was unbearable. I refused. Then came the letter, Julia's handwriting unmistakable on the envelope. I didn't need to open it to know its contents: apologies, pleas for understanding, maybe even the offer of friendship. It didn't matter, into the fire it went, the flames consuming her words, her apologies turning to ash. When word reached me that Julia was seeing someone new, it was as if the final piece of my resolve snapped. The injustice of it, her ability to simply move on and find happiness while I was stuck in this endless loop of anger and retribution, was maddening. My friends' warnings, my boss's threats, even Julia's attempts at reconciliation, all faded into the background, overshadowed by a resurgence of bitterness and a renewed desire for revenge. The world I'd known, the life I'd built, was unrecognizable now, transformed by a cascade of choices driven by betrayal and a quest for vengeance that promised no satisfaction, no matter the outcome. I never thought I'd be the guy sculpting around in the dead of night, fueled by a toxic mix of rage and despair. Yet, there I was, key in hand, etching my hurt into the paint of Julia's car. It was a moment of madness, a tangible mark of my pain, but as the first light of dawn caught the gleam of the scratched metal, reality crashed down on me. The act, meant to deliver a final blow to Julia, was instead captured in high definition by the watchful eye of a CCTV camera perched innocently above. The police didn't knock, they banged, a relentless sound that matched the pounding in my head. Handcuffed and hauled away, I realized this was more than just a rock bottom, it was a new, unimaginable low. The job that I'd clung to, the last vestige of my previous life, vanished with my arrest, leaving me adrift in a sea of my own making. Meanwhile, Julia found solace in the arms of another, her happiness blossoming even as mine withered. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my quest to make her feel a fraction of my pain, she had moved on, leaving me to wallow in the consequences of my actions. The news of Julia's decision to leave the city with her partner was a cold splash of reality. My actions hadn't anchored her to me, they had severed the last ties that bound us. In a last-ditch effort to salvage a shred of dignity, I went to her, a man broken by his own doing. "Julia, please, I'm sorry," I stammered, standing at her doorstep, a place I once called home. But the door that opened wasn't the gateway to forgiveness I'd hoped for. Julia, stronger and more resolved than I'd ever seen her, didn't hesitate. "Mike, it's too late. I've moved on. You should, too." Watching her drive away the next morning, the finality of our severed ties hit me with the force of a freight train. The love of my life, the woman I vowed to protect, was gone, leaving me with nothing but the ruins of the life I'd destroyed. The road to redemption seemed insurmountable, a path marred by the wreckage of my own making. As her car disappeared into the distance, a sobering thought settled in my heart. The cost of my actions was far greater than I ever imagined, a price paid not in moments of anger, but in the endless stretch of what remained of my life. The night I found myself alone, staring at the empty walls of what used to be our bedroom, the weight of my actions finally sank in. It was in that hollow silence, with the echo of my mistakes for company, that I realized something had to change. I was at rock bottom, jobless, friendless, and now, without the woman I once vowed to spend my life with. The path to self-destruction I'd walked down on had led me here, and it was time to find my way back. I started therapy the following week, a decision that felt like admitting defeat but ended up being my first step towards redemption. Sitting in that small, too-bright room across from a stranger who promised nothing but a safe space to unravel, I began to unpack the anger, the loss, and the myriad of emotions I'd bottled up. It wasn't just Julia's betrayal, I found myself admitting out loud, the words tasting bitter but necessary. I played a part in our downfall, too. Reconnecting with old friends proved harder than I anticipated. The phone calls were awkward, the apologies stumbled and often met with silence. I'd burned bridges, acted out in ways that left deep scars, and while some offered cautious forgiveness, others were not so willing to forget. It was a tough pill to swallow, acknowledging the friendships I'd sacrificed on the altar of my vengeance. In search of an outlet, a way to make sense of the chaos I'd created, I started a blog. Typing out the first post felt like speaking into the void, but as I continued to share my journey, raw and unfiltered, the void began to talk back. Comments trickled in, from people who'd been through their own battles with betrayal, with revenge. There was solace in our shared experiences, a community of strangers finding comfort in each other's stories. News of Julia's engagement reached me through the grapevine of mutual friends, a bittersweet pill that forced me to confront the final remnants of what could have been. She was moving on, finding happiness in a new life far removed from the wreckage of ours. It stung, yes, but beneath that sting was a flicker of something else, hope. Hope that moving forward was possible, not just for her, but for me too. As I continued to write, to reflect, and to heal, my blog morphed into something bigger than my own story. It became a beacon for those navigating their own dark waters, a reminder that redemption was within reach if you were willing to work for it. And as Julia built her future with someone else, I began to construct one for myself, grounded not in revenge or regret, but in understanding, forgiveness, and the promise of new beginnings. The day I walked into the local charity to volunteer, it was like stepping into a different world. A world where my past mistakes and heartaches didn't define me. Here, I was just Mike, a guy trying to make a difference. It felt good, real good. Helping out at the shelter, seeing the direct impact of my actions on others' lives, it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that I met Anna. She was different from anyone I'd known, her kindness and genuine interest in those around her drawing me in. We started slow, coffee dates that turned into long walks, conversations that delved deeper than I'd gone in years. She knew my story, the blog made sure of that, but she saw beyond it, to the man I was becoming. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to entertain the possibility of love again. Then, out of the blue, Thomas reached out. The last person I expected to hear from, yet there he was, on the other end of the line, his voice heavy with his own burdens. "Mike, I need advice," he said, a vulnerability in his tone I'd never heard before. We met up, two men linked by a shared history of mistakes and consequences. Our conversation was long and raw, filled with admissions of fault and the desire to change. I shared my journey, the painful process of letting go of anger and moving towards forgiveness. It was cathartic, speaking to someone who understood the depth of the pain caused by betrayal. Thomas left that meeting with a resolve to fix the bridges he'd burned, inspired by the changes he saw in me. It was a reminder of how far I'd come, not just in healing myself, but in reaching a place where I could help others on their path to redemption. That encounter led me to start a support group for men grappling with betrayal in the lure of revenge. What began as a handful of guys sitting around a coffee table, sharing their stories, grew into something larger. We became a community, a place where men could come to find understanding, support, and a way forward. The support group's growth was a testament to the need for a space where men could express their vulnerabilities and work through their pain without judgment. It was rewarding, watching the group evolve, seeing firsthand the healing power of shared experiences and mutual support. Through volunteering, finding love, connecting with Thomas, and starting the support group, my life had taken a turn I never anticipated. Each step forward was a step away from the man I used to be, towards a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of new beginnings. The day I realized I was genuinely happy again, it hit me like a burst of sunlight through a long overcast sky. There I was, laughing and planning a future with Anna, a woman who walked into my life when I was convinced I'd never find love again. Our relationship wasn't just about the romance, it was built on a foundation of trust, open communication, and a deep understanding of the value of second chances. We'd been through our respective storms, but together, we found our calm. The moment I proposed to Anna, it was nothing like the grand gestures you see in movies. It was intimate, just us, in our little living room that had become a home filled with love and new memories. The simplicity of it all underscored the profoundness of our journey. "Will you marry me?" I asked, my voice steady but my heart racing. Her yes was a whisper, but it echoed like a shout of joy in my heart. Meanwhile, Julia had found her own path to happiness, marrying her partner in a ceremony in her new city. The news reached me not as a sting, but as a soft closure to a chapter-long close. She deserved happiness, just as I had found mine. Reflecting on the past, I realized the journey from the depths of despair to where I stood now was not just about moving on, it was about transforming my pain into something positive. My blog, once a personal outlet for my anguish and regret, had morphed into a lifeline for others grappling with their darkness. Compiling those entries into a book felt like the next step, a way to reach out and offer hope on a larger scale. The book's success took me by surprise. It became a bestseller, resonating with people far beyond my initial circle. Speaking engagements and workshops followed, allowing me to advocate for mental health and the healing power of forgiveness. My story, once a source of personal shame, had become a beacon of hope for others. Then came the day Anna and I welcomed our child into the world, a tangible symbol of new beginnings and the love that had grown between us. Holding our baby for the first time, I felt the last remnants of my old self slip away, replaced by a man who had learned, grown, and was ready to embrace this new chapter. In the quiet hours of the night, with my family asleep, I penned a letter to Julia. Not to send, but to articulate the final piece of forgiveness and let go of any lingering resentment. It was my way of acknowledging our shared past, thanking her for the lessons learned, and officially closing that door to open another fully to my future. As I sealed the letter, placing it in a drawer, a sense of peace enveloped me. I was ready to move forward, not just for myself, but for Anna, our child, and the many lives I hoped to touch with my story. My journey from despair to redemption was complete, but the path to helping others had just begun. With hope, gratitude, and a heart open to all the possibilities the future held, I stepped into the dawn of a new day, ready to write the next chapter. I, 40 male, and my wife, 32 female, had just moved into a new neighborhood and we didn't know anybody there. Thankfully, through our children, we were able to meet some cool couples that we could hang out with. One of those couples, let's call them Larry and Pam, was especially cool to us. We had a lot of the same interests and they lived this sort of jet-setting lifestyle even though they had kids. It was something that my wife and I thought was impossible before we met them. The four of us hit it off and we spent a lot of time together. It helped that our children were close too. It worked out very well when we wanted to go out and have double dates. We could travel and we had them to talk to about things going on with our kids. After a few months of knowing them, I started to notice that Larry was a little flirty. I joked about it one time when he was flirting with my wife, just telling him to back off because she's taken. Pam shrugged her shoulders and assured me that he was just a flirt and didn't mean anything by it. I was confident in my relationship and I wasn't worried about a little flirting. I've always been under the impression that it was harmless as long as it didn't evolve into anything else. But the flirting continued. It happened often enough that I was starting to get a little uncomfortable with it. My wife was gorgeous. This isn't saying that Pam wasn't, but Larry would have been crazy not to want my wife, but I wasn't sure if he was respecting our boundaries. Pam and Larry sent their kids to a summer camp every year and they were able to convince my wife and I to send our kids to the same one. The idea behind it was if the kids were all away for 2 weeks, we could take a grown-up vacation without them. It honestly sounded great. My wife and I were looking forward to going away with them. We thought that it would be a great opportunity to take time for ourselves and almost have a second honeymoon of sorts. In the weeks leading up to our departure, my wife had been growing a little bit distant. I kind of chalked it up to thinking that she was going to miss our kids while we were gone. 2 weeks away from them was more than we'd ever spend apart and I knew it would be hard for her. But I noticed that she was making secret phone calls and texting people very privately. I was a little curious about what was happening. The day of the departure came and we joined Pam and Larry at a vacation rental we all went on together. It was right on the beach, there was a jacuzzi tub on the porch, there was a large smoker grill, and we had high-end luxurious accommodations. It was heavenly. The first night that we were there, we bought some beer and wine and we all sat outside after I manned the grill and got the little trunk. I noticed that my wife and Larry were once again very flirty. I was in high spirits so I once again laughed it off. I went to bed and when I woke up the next morning my wife was not there. When I got up and moved around the house, I saw that she was out by the water in her bathing suit and going for a swim. That would have been fine had Larry not been there with her. He was shirtless in his swimming trunks standing very close to her. He was clearly looking her over in her bathing suit and my wife made no effort to divert his gaze. Right away I walked out and joined them. They both welcomed me as if nothing was going on, which made me feel a little better. I still didn't like Larry ogling my wife so I practically dragged him back to the house. Later that night all of us went out dancing. Again we had some drinks and we were getting tipsy. On the dance floor, I noticed that Larry was gravitating toward my wife. At this point I was moving past the laughing it off phase. He was constantly around my wife and it was rubbing me the wrong way. What was even more infuriating about it was that my wife was letting it happen. He would go over to her and put his hands on her waist and she would lean into him. Did she think it was me? Was she that drunk? I waited until the following morning to ask my wife about it. She laughed it off and told me that I had nothing to worry about. She apparently didn't even remember dancing with Larry. On the third and final day of our vacation, shit hit the fan. We were supposed to stay at the vacation rental for 6 days, but I ended up having to leave early because I walked in on Larry with my wife. We had gone the entire day without any issues aside from me catching glimpses of Larry looking at my wife in her bikini. I was happy with what my wife had told me and I wasn't going to worry about it. But of course, as soon as you let your guard down, you realize that you were right all alone. We wanted to throw some stuff on the grill, so I was out back doing that. Pam was with me and helping to skewer some chicken and vegetables. I hadn't even noticed that my wife and Larry were missing. I ran inside to grab some more meat from the fridge and I heard some shuffling from the laundry room. I paused and listened carefully to what it was. I could hear what was clearly two people trying to be quiet while having sex. I opened the door right away and saw my wife pinned against the wall with Larry in front of her. They were in the middle of having sex. They were so into it that they almost didn't even notice me walking in. Moments after I opened the door, Pam walked inside to grab some more vegetables and saw them too. She screamed at Larry and he jumped backward, dropping my wife on the ground. Both of them looked at us like deer in headlights. They never thought we would catch them. I just walked away and went to pack my bags to leave. My wife chased me up to the room and tried to beg me not to leave and to forgive her. She said that he meant nothing. He had just been there at the right time. I had absolutely nothing to say to that. Was the laundry room the right time? It didn't make any sense and I was done with it. I told her to get away from me and she did. I noticed that her phone was on the nightstand in the bedroom charging, so I went through it just to see how long it had been going on. It had been going on for weeks from what I could tell. It seems like she and Larry had been messaging each other about how excited they would be to go to the beach house. Larry told my wife that he was more excited to see her in a bathing suit than anything else. At first my wife replied saying that it was inappropriate, but he then pursued it more. She ended up confessing to him that she had thought he was attractive and she didn't mind a little secrecy in her life. They met up once before we all went to the beach house and had sex in our kitchen. I found Pam and I told her about everything I learned through my wife's phone and she was just as hurt as I was. She and I ended up leaving the beach house together and going back home. The entire drive back we were talking about how angry we were and how we wanted to ruin their lives. They didn't get to cheat on us and just be happy after. When I got married, my mother encouraged me to get a prenuptial agreement. I wasn't the wealthiest person in the world, but I had received an inheritance before I met my wife and I had a comfortable nest egg. On top of that, I had a good job that paid me well and gave me good benefits. It was enough so my wife didn't have to work. Our agreement clearly stated that if we were to divorce, she would be given a percentage of my assets, with the exception of if we divorced due to her infidelity or her betrayal of our marital vows. Because she cheated, I could leave her without fear of losing a penny. That was the best thing that I could think of to get her where it hurt. She didn't come home until the following day, which made me question if she was just taking advantage of the time she had with Larry. I told her about how we would be getting divorced and how I wanted her out of the house, and she swore that I couldn't do that to her. She told me that she would have rights and that in our divorce she was entitled to half of everything. It almost seemed like she wanted that all along. I questioned if she ever loved me to begin with. I reminded her about our prenuptial agreement and I watched the indignation in her eyes fade as she realized she was going to be completely screwed. Pam and I both ended up divorcing our spouses. I didn't have to pay a cent to my wife and I ended up selling the house. Now I'm just trying to pick up the pieces that were left behind in all the mess. I know that there are still some good people out there, but I just have to find them. OP, I can't believe you had to go through all of that. It's heartbreaking to find out that your partner is cheating on you, and it's so much worse when it's with a friend. You were definitely right to be suspicious about Larry's flirting with her. For anyone to blatantly flirt with a married woman in front of their wife, they clearly don't have any respect for boundaries. The fact that they were stupid enough to continue their affair while all of you guys were at the house is honestly baffling. It doesn't even seem like they were trying to hide what they were doing. I'm glad you were able to come out on top in the divorce. It definitely sounds like she was banking on being favored by the courts. Your mother was smart when she convinced you to sign the prenup. I can't help but wonder if she saw something in your wife that you didn't. I hope that you and can move past this and find new partners that will treat you guys properly. I wish you the best. Now let's move on to our next story. My wife and I met 8 years ago in a bar. She was attractive and single, and so was I. We hit it off, and after that we pursued a relationship together. She gave me some of the best years of my life. I started a family with her and I really thought that we were going to grow together. Unfortunately, I found out that she was having an affair with her boss. Because of that we divorced. It was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to experience, and I just want to find a way to move on from it. But here's the story anyway. We had just bought a house and we were undergoing a lot of stress with remodeling and moving. On top of that, both my wife and I were working a lot in our respective careers to try to make our way up the ladder. I work as a copywriter and she is a journalist. She was very close with her boss and all the other employees at the paper she worked for. I know that she saw her boss as sort of a mentor for her when she started. He helped her master writing in her field and he often gave her special stories to cover that fit her interests. I knew the man well also. He was a widower and my wife had a lot of sympathy for him because she was worried about him being alone all the time. His children had moved out of the house and he lived by himself. At first I thought that the relationship was harmless. Years had gone by and he was more of a father figure to her than anything else. Finding out that he was the person that she had been having an affair with was beyond shocking. I started to notice that things were off when she was spending more time in the office. Her job is easily one that she doesn't even have to go in for. She has a home office that she can work from whenever she wants to, but she chooses to go in because it helps her focus and she enjoys socializing with her coworkers. When she told me that she would have to be staying late, I questioned why she wouldn't just come home and work in the office. Certainly, that was better than staying in an office building by herself. She could have had dinner with her family and then went right to work. Having it happen one time would have been something to forget about, but when she was staying late in the office 2 or 3 times a week, I had some red flags waving. Normally I wouldn't assume that she was cheating on me, but I had read a lot of Reddit posts and confessions from people who were being cheated on. I started to worry if maybe that was the case here. I honestly didn't even know where to begin with trying to find out if she was cheating on me. I decided that the best thing to do would be just to observe some of her habits and behaviors and see if everything was all in my head. The more I watched her, the more I realized there might have been something going on. Another thing that I noticed was how she would tilt her phone away from me when she looked at it. It was odd, that wasn't something she had ever done before that I was aware of. If she wasn't trying to hide anything, I didn't understand why she would tilt it. I was starting to work myself up thinking that she was having an affair, so I decided to take the plunge and hire someone who could dig around. I found a local private investigator who took on the case. After I told him everything I was suspicious about, he decided that the best place to start would be at her work. He waited outside around the end of her workday to see if he could follow her and see where she was going. On the second day that he was working, I got a text message from my wife telling me that she would be staying late in the office. I immediately told the private investigator about that so they would keep a close eye on her building to see where she went if she left. However, she didn't leave the office. When she eventually did, the private investigator followed her to our house. It seemed like she really was staying late at the office. I told the private investigator that I was clearly in the wrong for what I was doing and I wanted to call them off. They ended up convincing me that there still could have been something going on in the office. I thought it was silly, but I told them that I would pay for another day just to rule that out, and then if they didn't find anything I would terminate our contract. Sadly, they found something. My wife was yet again staying late in the office and the private investigator found her in her boss's office performing oral sex on him. He got some pictures and videos of it for me. When he showed me, I was shocked and disturbed, and I felt like the world was falling out from under my feet. I had my suspicions, but I never wanted to confirm them. Part of me had been hoping that hiring the private investigator would just prove that my wife was faithful. Her boss was like a father figure to her, so I couldn't comprehend how they even started an affair. Regardless of my confusion, I was done with her. I had given her everything I possibly could and she was throwing it back in my face. I felt a lot of pity for myself, but after wallowing in that for a while I was angry. I wanted to show them that they couldn't both just treat me the way they did without there being consequences. There was a rival newspaper in the area that I remembered my wife always talking about. Her paper and the other were always trying to one-up each other. I had the perfect story for them. Before I sent an article to the rival magazine, I met with the HR manager of the newspaper my wife worked at. I told them about everything that happened and how they were having sex in the office, showing them the evidence. It was a clear violation of their policy and they assured me that they would both be dealt with. 2 days after I did that, my wife came home in tears, complaining about how she was fired. She didn't tell me what happened. She lied and said that she was laid off due to budget cuts. I was partially surprised that she continued with the lie, but at the same time she had already lied so much. When I knew that she was fired, I sent an email to the newspaper. I got a response saying that they were going to cover the story, but they needed to put a spin on it to make it more marketable. Otherwise, it would have just looked like revenge porn. The story that they ran with was about a boss sleeping with his worker and getting them both fired. They put the picture I attached in, though they blurred the faces of my wife and her boss. Because my wife worked for the rival paper, we never had that one at home. However, that morning I made a special stop to go and grab the latest issue of the newspaper. I sat right at the kitchen table and opened it up in front of her while I drank my coffee. Right on the back of the paper was the article with a picture of her in her boss's office, performing sexual acts on him. She nearly spit out her coffee when she saw it. She yanked it out of my hand and read the article while I sat there with my arms crossed in front of me. She didn't say anything, probably because she didn't think I realized what was on the paper. As she was reading it, I commented on how funny it was that the article mentioned a boss and an employee getting fired the very same day that she was. That clued her into my knowledge about her affair. She tried to explain herself and told me that it was a one-time thing, but I didn't believe her. She was mad that I had the article published. It's hindsight. I do feel like I went a little too far with that. We lived in a small town and everybody saw that article. It wouldn't have taken a lot of brainpower to figure out who it was. We ended up getting a divorce. We had a prenup, so thankfully I didn't know her anything. We sold the house and split everything down the middle. It's just hard to believe that something like this would happen to me. I've been loyal and trustworthy throughout our entire marriage and I never expected that. I know it's going to take a lot to move on from, but I'm hoping I can heal soon. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through something like that. It's difficult to admit to yourself that there is the possibility your partner is cheating, but you do need to trust your gut in some situations. You definitely did the right thing by hiring a private investigator to do digging for you when you didn't know how. From the way it sounds, their affair had been going on for quite some time. It's curious to think about how they started their affair when their relationship was very clearly almost father-daughter-like. It's always so interesting to me when people have affairs in the office they work in and don't expect anybody to ever catch them. In my opinion, that's just karma coming and getting back at you. I hope you're able to heal from this and you won't let this hold you back in future relationships. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My wife, 49 female, and I, 53 male, were married for 30 years. We have 3 adult children, 2 of which are married with children of their own. Our kids hosted a 30th anniversary party for us, and as a present to my wife, I decided to get her wedding band engraved. For a few years, our marriage had simmered down. We still dutifully worked our careers, and I thought we were both tired at the end of the day. My wife never asked me for anything or tried to talk to me about what else she needed. She claimed to be perfectly content and happy with our way of life at this point. Our kids were out of the house, but they came over all the time. I knew we weren't ready to retire. My wife was a popular and well-respected woman in town. She worked in the hospital as a speech therapist. I was also pretty popular, but only because I was good at making my wife's friends laugh. I was a natural comic and did a whole bit for them about my wife being the breadwinner. She started to look at me like I was a joke she didn't understand. Our intimacy levels dropped to a kiss each morning and night. I was pretty sure that whenever we did have sex, my wife had to think of a fantasy to make it more entertaining. I did ask her if she was satisfied with our love life, or if she wanted to change something. She said there was nothing we could change, then corrected herself to, there's nothing we should change. She said I was the man for the job. So, life went on as normal, but I wanted to see what my wife was up to at home. She always had one random weekday off. I installed 2 security cameras. One in the high corner of our front porch, and the other in the high corner of our living room, blending in with my prized hunting trophy. I was disappointed that my wife's engraved wedding band still hadn't returned in the mail 3 weeks after our anniversary party. I asked my wife if she ever got a small package in the mail, reminding her that we were still waiting for her ring. Her expression told me she'd completely forgotten about it. That made me very upset. She said she hadn't gotten a package yet. I was at work the day after that, when I checked the camera footage for the past few weeks to see if the package was stolen off our porch. It didn't take me long to find the clip of the mailman, 9 days earlier, holding a small package with the rest of our mail. He walked up to the door, grinning ear to ear, and knocked. My wife answered and pulled him in, excitedly. On the next camera, I watched them make out and undress like fighting cats, unashamed to be all over each other in my house. Clothes were strewn all over the place, and in the commotion, the small package slid under the couch. I watched the mailman take my wife to the living room. My wife of 30 years was having an affair with the mailman. I found 3 more clips of her sleeping with him, each on the days she had off, and I didn't. I figured the affair had been going on since before I installed cameras. Our whole life together, our children, house, careers, all seemed like an illusion. All the time I spent loving and living with my wife was for nothing. She couldn't deny another man, not even after decades spent by my side. It made me feel like our life together wasn't enough for her. Having a committed, loyal husband, 3 successful children, and 4 beautiful grandchildren wasn't enough for her. She had to sleep with another man. For what? What could he offer her that I hadn't already? The fleeting excitement of something new. When it was over, the living room looked exactly as it did before, except for the small package under the couch. The first thing I did was take the video clips to the post office. I showed the head honcho and filled out a report. He'd assured me that AP would lose his job for this. Then I went home. I walked past my grinning wife, straight to the couch, reached under, and pulled out the small package. She was surprised and confused that I knew exactly where it was. I pointed to the security camera. She looked, but it took her a few seconds to find it. When she did, she was mortified. Her breathing became deep and rapid, and she looked at me like a scared rabbit. I asked her if there was something else she wanted to confess to, now that she knew about the camera. She stuttered and just started saying no repeatedly, slowly shaking her head. I was staring at her like I already knew, so she broke down crying and sat on the couch, the exact spot she cheated on me. I screamed at her, essentially asking why she felt like cheating on me and why she actually went through with it. Her excuse was that it was normal for people to fall out of touch, but we didn't have to get divorced because I could do the same thing. I asked her if she even knew what marriage meant. Then I asked her if she remembered her vows. Her head dropped. I told her to pack her bags, because I wasn't living with a cheating, smelly rodent. Her jaw dropped and she asked me if I was serious. She couldn't believe I was throwing away 30 years of marriage. I told her she was the one that threw it away. I was just acknowledging it was trash. She started ugly crying. I ignored her for a while and started packing her stuff, but she crawled over to me, trying to touch me. I told her to stop acting like a baby and own up to her actions. She broke her vows to me, so our contract was null and void. I didn't have to live with her, and since she was the offender, she needed to get out. Well, she called the kids over for support. That was her mistake, because they sided with me and started packing up all her stuff. She couldn't believe it. Her kids and I packed her up and moved her out of the house. She went to stay with our eldest, becoming their full-time nanny in exchange for food and shelter. My son humiliated her by saying she wasn't allowed to have any lovers or strange men in the house, and on nights she got permission to go out, her curfew was 9 p.m. AP was also humiliated. Like my wife, He was well known around town and the truth bomb spread fast. The footage was leaked online after I provided it to the post office. He was fired and became a laughingstock. What moron sleeps with a guy's wife in their house, while on the job, in perfect view of security cameras? My wife stayed with our son and his family for 8 months before she had enough to get her own place, but it wasn't meant to last. She tried asking our kids for help until she could pay them back, but they denied her, saying she raised them never to lend out money to anyone. My ex bitterly moved back in with our oldest, resuming her position as full-time nanny for the foreseeable future. I've been on a few dates with a nice woman, but I decided to try focusing on enjoying myself and who I am. The kids also take me out for pop nights. I'm rebuilding a lot of things about myself that I had smothered, trying to make my ex happier. OP, I am so sorry your wife of 30 years started an affair with the mailman. It's true that people change and grow over time, but this can be and should be something that brings two people closer. Admire their uniqueness, qualities, and point of view. There's no one exactly like them, and nobody knows every trial and hardship that person has faced. Their way of thinking could be incomprehensible to their spouse, but they can do their best to understand and stay open-minded. Appreciation for another life, especially that of the spouse you love, knows no limit. When a person gets married, they are promising to resist temptations that lack in comparison to the love they have for their spouse. Love isn't always a feeling, but it is a choice. When you aren't feeling the love you used to for your spouse, choose to love them by remaining loyal and honest. Talk to them about how you feel, even if it hurts, and even if it means separating. Cheating is never the answer, and as a person with appreciation for another life, it should never be an option. You handled this exceptionally well, and I thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into our second story for today. My ex, 23 female, and I, 27 male, had our honeymoon in Hawaii. My family was well off, while hers wasn't. That didn't matter to me, and even though my parents warned me to watch out for this girl, I didn't. She seemed very genuine and sweet. While dating, she always wanted to see me, even if it was as simple as a walk in the park. She hung on to my every word and asked me really smart and observant questions. I was studying to be a lawyer, so I was very busy with schoolwork and reading. For that reason, much of the time we spent together was in silence, her laying on my lap while I worked. I took her on a few classy dates, went to dinner and a show, an upscale restaurant, and horseback riding. She was really wooed by the date on horseback, because I already had the trail memorized in my head. I admit I was showing off a bit. That's when she met my parents, and they warned me about her. I don't know how, but it's like they saw right through her genuinely interested charade. They told me she just wanted the money I promised. She didn't actually know me or what I liked, she only talked about herself and what she wanted. I admitted she was light-hearted and didn't take much seriously, but I thought that's what made us a good match. She could help balance me out and encourage me to have fun. Sometimes when we'd talk on the phone, she would mention other men in her class and I'd just roll my eyes. I wondered if she did this to make me jealous, or if she was trying to see how possessive I was of her. I had a serious conversation with her around 2.5 years of dating. I asked her if she knew how serious I was about her, and if she felt the same. She said yes, and swore I was the only one she wanted to love. I could tell she wanted to say for the rest of her life, but she stopped because she didn't want to spoil any proposal. Around our 3rd anniversary, I graduated and regretfully proposed. During the wedding planning, and even on our honeymoon, she was very selfish. As we tanned on the beach, she actually had the nerve to say she was bored and missed her friends. I had a wonderful time in Hawaii, swimming with dolphins, snorkeling, bar hopping, club dancing, and having amazing sex with my new wife. This was like a celebration of life for me. I was finally done with school and married the woman I saw a future with. We were on a tour of the island when all the magic and excitement I had for the future disappeared. The tour concluded, and I was gazing at the view when I noticed my wife wasn't standing by my side. It took me 10 minutes to find her making out with the tour guide in a secluded overgrown area. I yelled her name in disbelief, asking what the heck she was doing. She pulled away from the kiss, shocked I found them, but not guilty or remorseful. She was smirking and put her hands up, saying I caught them. The tour guide apologized and quickly left my death stare. I told her this was exactly what I was afraid of, that she didn't understand how serious and long-term marriage is. She said something like, "Come on, it's not that big of a deal, it was just a short make-out session for being a great tour guide." She didn't think it should affect me or our marriage at all. I told her she couldn't be more wrong. I left her there yelling after me. I hailed a cab and went to the touring office. I filed a report with the tour guide's name on it and caused so much of a scene that the manager came out and promised me he'd be fired. I walked back to the hotel for all my stuff and called to cancel her credit cards. Leaving her on the island without money was the only way to get through to her. Without doing this, I don't think she ever would have realized how bad it was to make out with someone else on her honeymoon. She only called me once before I got on the plane. When I turned off airplane mode, I had 78 missed calls and 10 voicemails. She was in shock that I left her there, and then she was scared when she realized her credit cards didn't work. We hadn't even added her name to my bank account yet, but I had enough of her information to cancel her credit cards. In the first voicemail she left, she said that she didn't know what she did to deserve this. As it turns out, this wasn't the first time she made out with someone while she was with me. She only made out with the tour guide because he did an excellent job and deserved a unique tip. A few voicemails later, she said how sorry she was and promised me that now she understood the severity of kissing another person. It still sounded like she was trying to convince herself how serious it was. What she really wanted was to convince me to come back for her, or at least buy her a plane ticket home and forget all about this. She said she still wanted to be my wife and hoped I would forgive her like a good husband would. I never responded to any of this. I was a lawyer, and I refused to play her games. I filed for divorce as soon as I landed. She stopped calling me, and I eventually found out she was at her parents' house. I heard through the grapevine that she expected a warm welcome and consolation from them after being stranded in Hawaii, but they only scolded her for losing a good husband so quickly. Her parents were ashamed by her selfish actions and weren't afraid to tell her how bad she messed up. Her friends also tried giving her a dose of reality by refusing to trust her. No one invited her to group outings because they were afraid she'd start making out with their boyfriend. She still complains and started leaving her parents in the middle of the night to hang out with strangers. She posts ridiculous videos online of her drinking too much, making out with people, and having a good time, as she puts it. OP from her behavior, it seems your wife's only goal is to do whatever she wants and use people. She didn't have money or personal goals, so she did her best to seem like a worthy match for you. I am relieved that you caught her and didn't waste any time trying to patch things up. That usually doesn't work out anyway, especially when there's infidelity so early on in the relationship. Not even a honeymoon in Hawaii was enough for this girl, and if she's ever going to happiness in life, she needs to take a chill pill. The world doesn't revolve around you, and you can't sail through life by using people. Don't let this woman discourage you from meeting a wiser, more honorable woman when the time is right. Focus on growing as a person, and let people you meet earn your trust. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Before I met my wife, I was in a relationship with a girl for 5 years. It ended with her cheating on me with my best friend. And then they are getting together for about 5 years. All my other friends continue to mainly hang out with my ex-girlfriend and ex-best friend. So I felt like trash that everyone threw away. I wasn't in a great place when I met my wife, and I'm sure that contributed to my stay. Even when I could tell that something was off, I cut my friends out for about 10 years. Now I see one of them, but just at social gatherings that involve mutual friends of ours. None of which were from the original group. Not sure about my ex-best friend, but things turned out terrible for my ex. She's very unhappily married with 1 child. My sister just gave me an update on my ex the other week coincidentally. Her husband plays game all day and wouldn't help her. Her mom moved down close to where they live to help out. And my ex is always complaining to her mom that she doesn't help enough. I also think I was afraid of abandonment issues. Therapy is starting to get into this issue. When I was 2, my father was sent to prison for 7 years. And according to my therapist, I became terrified that if I did the wrong thing, people and the society in general would like to banish me. And that pretty much tracked my understanding of myself throughout my life. I first met my current wife 10 years ago. The first year was amazing. She gave birth to our first son. And after that, the dead bedroom started. She was pressuring me to get married to her. And I thought the problem in our relationship is because I don't trust anyone because of my ex cheating on me from my previous relationship. So I proposed to her thinking that it would get better. She was asking me to, and I thought it would help with the dead bedroom. Bad idea. Few months after proposing to her, we were in our living room when I saw a text pop up on her phone. The text was from her ex-boyfriend, asking about her whereabouts. I confronted her about it and threatened to call off the engagement. She showed me their text correspondent and I didn't find anything extra. Just both of them checking on each other occasionally. Although it seems like a lot of texts have been deleted. After she claimed innocence, I had no proof of infidelity. Plus we share a son together. We almost called off our engagement. I should have walked away then. Except I wouldn't have my son, and he's truly worth everything I went through. Over the next few months, she did things to make amends and prove to me that she loved me. I decided to get married to her. We had a big, expensive, beautiful wedding. Honeymoon in Hawaii. Everything she asked for. Then after the wedding, things went downhill. She started to withdraw intimacy and would always give excuses why she couldn't be intimate with me. We would fight about it all the time. I would tell her it felt like she didn't love me. I was being cheated on, not the first time. So I knew the feeling your partner gives off when they are done with you and yearn for someone else. She would tell me I was too needy and say why was she with me if she didn't love me. I would tell her empty, loveless marriages are common and I didn't want to be in one. But in the end, I would stay. Repeat this for the next few years. We eventually bought a house. I was reluctant, but she was pushing it. I would tell her how the way everything was going made me reluctant to take the next step. Buy a house. Have more kids. She would just insert the thing she was pursuing into her argument. If I don't love you, then why do I want to get a house with you? Trying to get pregnant by you. I never really had an answer except that she was unhappy with herself and afraid to be alone. Our bedroom life had grounded to a halt and we would go weeks without having excess. Then one day, out of the blue, she initiated excess. Something she normally wouldn't do. She was trying to get me to choke her. First time she has ever done this. I thought it was something new. Maybe she was trying to spice up our relationship. So I went along with it. We went from plain vanilla excess to her wanting it rough. Our bedroom life picked back up like before we had our son. Then all of a sudden, it dropped off and she started making excuses again. I thought something was wrong. I noticed that she was texting a lot and was guarding her phone. When she sleeps, her phone will be under her pillow. Realizing that she was hiding something from me, I snatched her phone out of her hand when she was texting and ran over to my friend's house next door. And she ran after me screaming for me to give her phone back to her. I shut the door in my friend's house and videoed all her text messages with my phone. I am glad I have the video, but I regret reading a lot of it. Turns out that she was having a full-blown affair with someone she knew in high school and recently went out of state for a few months. Which was why she started initiating excess with me. I returned with my friend as a witness and told her to leave our house, and she did without incident. The text I read was so graphic that they run across my eyelids all night now when I try to sleep. She was so enthusiastic. I am okay with it being over. It was a terrible marriage, but the way it ended is a walking nightmare. I always felt like a placeholder just waiting for some guy that's actually lit the fire to just come and casually take her. And that's exactly what happened. In the meantime, I was building a life for her. But she just used what I built like a lather for herself. Super cold. But looking back, all the signs were there. I will be able to apply this lesson to my next relationship, which is good. But I will never marry again. Don't want any more children than what I currently have. So she definitely took all that away from me forever. When I think of my son and how terrible it all was, I feel strong. But when I'm alone, especially at night, my mind keeps imagining the two of them together. As much as I try to push it out, I can't seem to. During the week when she tried to get me to choke her in bed, then finding evidence of a full-blown affair on her phone, December 1st, that whole choking thing was more like beginning of September. And yes, it was a huge red flag that I missed. 5 months later, so I know that he dominates her. And that really gives my imagination ammunition to use on myself. I have to preface this with, I would never hurt myself. But at night, I want to die. I know in the end, all three of us would be better off from the divorce. But it's really hard right now. It all happened at the beginning of December. I immediately told her to leave when I found everything. Update. It is almost impossible to push away, especially at night all alone. The first time so far that those thoughts entered my mind and I was truly able to say and feel like who gives AF in a healthy way, was the day I posted my story in the Dead Bedroom sub. That was definitely the motivation behind me stumbling into this sub and posting. I have been struggling again over the past few days. A lot of it has to do with the settlement. I am working on getting her to sign it and agree. So I am placating to her. This includes FaceTime calls that are supposed to be about the parents, not with her having access to him, where we basically act like family again. I have put in boundaries for the FaceTime calls now. My sister administered the phone when my son is with me. But the ones that are the other way around still end up like I described. It takes a lot out of me to put up with that act and then feel zero self-respect when it is done. She could take me to the cleaners if she wants, but has told me she had no intention of it and will sign off on all the marital assets that are mine. I feel stuck until she sings. I have hired a lawyer and we have started the process of drawing up the settlement. Update, yeah, I will be shooting for no contact with my ex. She is continuing to F with me and can't be trusted to even be appropriate and respectful during the FaceTime calls we are making once a night so we can each have contact with him every night. The other night she called and when I saw the screen, she was all done with makeup and I heard a deep voice at her new apartment. I agreed, not bad-mouthing her. Just going for no contact. Paternity test, check. STD test, check. My lawyer has drawn the settlement. My ex is reviewing it now. She said she would be finished reviewing by Monday, but surprise, she's dragging it out. We are still amicable on the surface, but we specialize in that all through our relationship. As soon as she signs it, I will explain to her I want zero contact outside our co-parenting app one will use to communicate schedule and any other info that should be known. Sickness, medical anything, bathroom frequency, last time he had Miralax or any meds we need both to be aware of, etc. I started therapy and joined a gym. The gym is going great. Therapy is off a bumpy start. The first therapist I went to, I didn't like. The second is way too expensive, but I did like. The second also has appointments like once a month, so I am going to keep going, but also look for another soon. My relationship with my son has transformed in a very positive way. I know later on I will have to return to being more of an authoritarian, but right now he's 3 and he and I are best buddies. I put so much more effort in everything. Feeling pretty hopeful. Definitely having a very dark moment every single day still. My ex got drunk one night and tried texting me. I didn't even acknowledge the text. I have my sister helping me to handle all communication with my ex for now. So her desperate text just sat at the bottom of our text log, front and center, for a couple of weeks. I did text her myself regarding the separation agreement. So now it's no longer just sitting there. It was a picture of her crying, and she texted me the word baby after it. It effed me a little, but now it feels good that I know she had at least an effing moment of regret because she had never expressed any regret or apologized to me. I showed my friends her text and it confused a lot of them. Sitting in bed one night, I had a revelation about the picture she sent. That was not the first picture she took of herself crying that night. She's obsessed with pictures on Instagram and on Facebook and how everything looks instead of the actual substance of anything. The reason I put crying in quotes and it was so confusing to everyone is that probably the first picture she took was her actually crying. I am sure she decided that one was not okay to send. So she probably sent like the 20th attempt. Which at that point she's just posing sad but trying to look alluring. She's a sick person just broken inside. Things are looking pretty good right now, but that could change if she tries to change too much in the separation agreement. Fingers crossed. It's hard to believe I live in a place where she can go and pull this SHT like having an affair, and yet she's the one that gets to decide how she can take me to the cleaners. I highly doubt I will ever allow myself to get married unless I relocate to Saudi Arabia. Their punishment for adultery is pretty severe. Winking face. I already threw her out as soon as I found everything. She agreed to leave and walk away from all the marital assets. We are sharing 50-50 custody, and I have hired a lawyer who's working on drawing up the settlement. I'm about to call the lawyer to check in now. Here we get the settlement signed. I intend to make sure her entire family knows what she had done. Update. We just finished signing the last of the divorce paperwork. I kept all the assets that were mine, bought her out of the house, and we are sharing 50-50 custody of my son. I am far more engaged with my son every moment I am with him, and with almost every aspect of my life in general. Been keeping my promise to myself to hit the gym. I have abs again. Visible abs. And after 2 therapists that didn't fit, I found one that is helping me navigate the mess that is life. My sister and mom moved in to help me keep my house for my son. That presents some challenges, honestly. But with the help from therapy, navigating those challenges is not as bad at all. They both love me and my son. So I just need to work on the way I approach any problems we have as a household. And problems become way more feasible and not so extreme. My business is really starting to thrive this year. So possibly in a few years, they can figure out more permanent living arrangements. I am currently sleeping on a Mophie bed in my living room. I give them the 2 of the 3 bedrooms, and my son has the 3rd. It's been super helpful and supportive to have my family with me through the hardest thing I have ever went through. I am eternally grateful to them. I dated a girl for a few weeks, but after it became obvious, she was going to keep pushing for monogamous relationship. When I feel like me being ready for that is years away. I broke it off with her. She was really sweet about it, which made me feel even worse at first. But it was important for me to look out for myself and my son and not just bend over someone else's needs. It was a good first step for me to grow and eventually finding another relationship, almost like a behavioral exercise. I am scared to trust anyone, but she was sweet. And after I started to get anxious about the way things were going, I spent about another week talking to her and then broke it off based on what I thought was best for me. So it feels like progress. Here is the text message I received from her. I know I kept my text very short with no emotion last night, thinking that was good enough for my half, but it isn't. I wish I could say I was surprised, but unfortunately I am not. A woman intuition is never wrong. I respect you for not wanting to drag me along if you're not really ready for it. As much as I do respect that, I gotta say it's definitely frustrating. I think after this separation and divorce process, you didn't expect to hit it off with someone so soon. That text you sent I know has nothing to do with me. That's you battling with your own things, and I get it. But you found someone good that I don't think you were expecting so soon. Someone to support and make you feel good about yourself again. I don't think you're scared to get hurt and scared to trust again. I think we both feel pretty similar about each other. And that scares you, so you're cutting it off. By all means, you do not have to respond if you don't want to, but I just had to express that. I'm here and you don't need to run. Figure your things out, and if you want to try again and start afresh with me, that offer is always on the table for you. You were a gentleman till the very end, and I will never forget that. You still are an amazing man, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. That was the text she sent me the day after I told her I didn't think we should see each other anymore. She's nice, but just wanted immediate attachment. I explicitly told her I didn't want that at this point in my life, but it seemed like she saw that as a challenge or obstacle to overcome rather than a genuine constraint. Now that my ex signed off on everything I needed her to, I no longer feel the need to bend to any of her wishes either, and have felt very comfortable putting my foot down when it comes to requests she has about our son or otherwise. I feel great for the most part, most happier, and keep getting compliments about how I look, more fit and just happy in general. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up so YouTube can promote my videos. Thank you, and have a— My father warned me before my wedding that he believed my fiancé would cheat on me if presented with an opportunity. I hated that he told me this. I never had a good relationship with my father, and I believed he was jealous that my fiancé was prettier than my mom and really in love with me. I didn't plan on having a close relationship with him during my married life. My mom was different, I could tell her anything, and she was really supportive. I almost felt bad she was still married to my asshole of a father. I went through with the marriage because my woman never gave me something to worry about. We were married for 7 years, living an hour and a half away from my parents, that entire time before more than one marriage came to an abrupt end. My wife had a job 30 minutes away in the direction of my parents' house. She started to become condescending and rude to me in February of that year. Eventually, I felt like the less I said, the better, so we just started watching movies or shows together when she was home from work. I worked from home writing and recording music. There. When I first started getting gigs, my wife was really supportive and came to my shows. After a few years, she got bored with it. I think she wished for me to become rich and famous. My wife continued disrespecting me and getting snappy until she told me she needed to start working late sometimes. I didn't believe that was the case. I waited in my car in her work parking lot. When she left at the usual time, she drove the opposite direction of work. I followed her all the way to my parents' house. I turned off my car lights way down the road and just inched closer along the curb. I saw my dad get in the car with her before she drove away. Was all I could think as I followed them at a long distance. I called my mom as I drove. She was out to dinner with a group of old friends. She asked me if anything was wrong and if she needed to come home, and I told her no. I said she could call me tomorrow. I didn't want to tell her what was happening. They pulled into a shopping center suddenly, and I think it was because they suspected they were being followed. I continued on, pulling into a neighborhood shortly ahead. I could see through the trees the moment my wife's car pulled out. They literally drove down the street to a hotel. I parked my car next to hers. This couldn't be happening. Did she drive my dad to a hotel? How was I supposed to get through something like this? How was my mom supposed to get through this? It was so unfair. After this, I was going to move out of state. My wife and father came out of the hotel an hour later. I was waiting by my wife's car and she freaked out when she saw me. My dad had a strange demeanor. I then decided to walk up to him and punched him in the face. He fell down and a hotel employee saw this. They called the police. My wife was already crying. She couldn't believe I was there. I think because I was there, she was more abruptly hit with the reality of what she'd done. She cried really hard, telling me she was sorry repeatedly. I screamed some choice words at her while my dad got to his feet. I told him he was a horrible father and the only reason my wife slept with him was that he convinced her to. I told him he was dead to me. I looked at my wife and called her a worthless harlot. I told her I would never see her again after our divorce was final. She reached out for me with tears streaming down her face like she needed a forgiving embrace. I pushed her away and she started crying even more. I got in my car to leave, but the police showed up. I told them everything that happened and my dad, surprisingly, didn't press charges against me for punching him. My wife apparently felt some remorse because she refused to give my dad a ride home. The police had to. I found out the next morning that he told my mom he was mugged while on a walk. I ignored all the calls and texts from my wife. She apparently slept in the hotel parking lot in her car since I told her she wasn't welcome in my house anymore. My mom called me the next morning, which is when she told me about the mugging. As hard as it was, I told her what happened the night before. At first, she didn't believe me, but then it made more sense to her and she knew I wouldn't lie about this. She wasn't as upset as I thought. She was more apologetic to me because it was my wife. She said she hadn't been very happy in the relationship for a while now, and this was a good time to end it. I was relieved we could support each other through the divorce process. My mom moved in with me, and my wife moved in with my dad. She only stayed there for 1 week though. My dad said she wasn't worth keeping around. Due to the infidelity and the police report that recorded the 3 of us at the hotel, my mom and I each got to keep our houses. My dad moved into a motel. My mom's house was built in such a way that it could easily be transformed into 2 independent living spaces. I used the money from selling my house to remodel my mom's house so I could live with her. She loved this idea. We each had our own front door, but we lived in the same place. We kept each other company and gave each other support. My wife moved out of state instead of me. She apparently had a distant cousin to live with in Philadelphia. My ex tried apologizing and asking me if we could move on from it, even after the divorce. She had a hard time accepting we were over, and she told me she missed me every day. I'm sorry, but cheating on me with my father is unforgivable. She didn't deserve to have anyone trust her again. As soon as she got a new boyfriend, I took the liberty of sharing with him through social media what my ex did to me. At first he didn't believe me, but he broke up with her a month later. My ex called me crying and yelling at me. I told her I didn't do anything wrong. If anything, I spared him heartbreak. She said she wouldn't do that ever again, and I asked her what made her do it to me. She said she didn't know, but my dad talked to her about how I never grew up to be a man and she could be loved better. I haven't spoken to my dad since that day. I don't know where he is or what happened to him. My mom hasn't spoken to him either, but we're there for each other. We each found a new person to start dating, so that's cool. I don't respond or answer calls from my ex anymore, and I won't barge into her dating life again. I realized I have to move on, and if I'm speaking with every new partner she has, I'm not moving on very well. I've actually gotten more gigs and income from my music since this happened. It's the thing I enjoy the most in life, and the fact that I can pursue this dream makes me a very happy man. Wow, OP, I am so sorry your father treated you this way. It's incredibly wrong and inappropriate of him. I'm glad you and your mom cut him out of your lives. It's amazing you both had each other for support, but so disappointing that this even happened. I'm relieved no charges were pressed against you in the heat of the moment, discovering your wife cheated on you. You made the right decision to immediately separate from your wife and file for divorce. I don't think anyone could completely forgive or move past this level of betrayal. Your wife had already started to see you in a bad light. She should have been mature enough to know how she felt about you independently of how your father felt about you. I believe you will find a woman who's mature enough to know that trust and communication are needed if a relationship is meant to last. A successful relationship needs two selfless and considerate people who don't let their egos get out of hand. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 25, took up a part-time job with Uber Eats to help earn us some extra money. I, 29, just started a good job, but I wouldn't be paid very much until my first raise after the training period. My wife was out driving around a lot, and she had this one male friend that she talked to all the time. They'd been friends since they were 12, so when we got married I didn't feel like I had a right to end the friendship. It had only ever been a friendship all the way to this point, so I didn't feel very worried about it. I knew her Facebook password, which was the only platform she used to message or call anyone, but I never logged into it until one particular day. On this day I was at work and she was Uber eating. Suddenly, for no reason at all, my brain told me to log into my wife's Facebook. I was pretty weirded out by it and hesitated. The longer I waited, the worse I felt, so I did it, and I was shocked. She was live messaging the friend I mentioned, and they were making arrangements for her to come over again. He mentioned that it was really convenient she was doing a delivery job and had a reason to be out. She said it was the perfect opportunity for them to have plate dates all the time. I can't tell you how much panic I felt in my chest. I just happened to log into her Facebook at work and read this. I called my coworker over. We were pretty good friends and told him what was going on. He asked if their messages had an address in them, and they did, from 4 months ago. I was on the verge of throwing up. I couldn't imagine my wife going behind my back like this even once. My coworker noticed how upset I was, and he gave me a pat on the back. He said his wife cheated on him 2 years ago, and since then he's met a new woman who hasn't wronged him even once. It really helped to hear that at the moment, but I didn't want to apply it to my situation yet. He suggested I file for divorce right away. I couldn't. I had to confront her first. Maybe I would the next day, but I just wanted to see what she had to say. I scrolled through the messages, some getting incredibly sexual or flirtatious. The first, "I love you," I saw was a knife through the heart. That's what made me decide to file for divorce. When I got home, I waited for my wife to walk through the front door. My coworker actually came over for the first time that night to be my support. As soon as my wife entered, she saw us sitting in the living room. I introduced her to him and said he is my witness and support while I go through this time in my life. She was really confused and asked what I meant by that. I asked her how her playdate went. I'm sure her heart stopped at this moment. She looked like she saw the Grim Reaper and then she fainted. When she came to, she was laying on the couch. I asked her again how her playdate went and she covered her face. She started wailing and crying. I told her I didn't have time for all this and wanted an answer. She just said she couldn't. I went and got my packed stuff with the help of my coworker and we loaded up his car and mine. She was freaking out the whole time, begging me to forgive her and let her prove to me she would never do this again. I told her I married her with the promise of her being faithful. Now that I knew she wasn't, why would I stick around? My coworker nodded in agreement as he helped me. I followed him to his house and stayed there while I looked for a new place to live. Unfortunately, my wife's mom owned the apartment we lived in and she didn't like me very much. Speaking of my MIL, my wife begged me not to tell her what she'd done because then she certainly wouldn't be allowed to live there anymore. I told her I wouldn't but she still found out. When MIL found out we were divorcing, she grilled her daughter for so long that she admitted to what she did. MIL was so disgusted and disappointed in her that she kicked her out and told her if she was going to be a slut, she could do it to earn a roof over her head. My wife continued doing Uber Eats but started sleeping in her car at night, showering at truck stops, and using lots of Febreze on her clothes and car seats. Her AP already had a roommate and absolutely refused to let anyone else move in with them. If he genuinely loved her, you'd think AP would find them a new place to live or something, but 6 months later, my ex was still living in her car. She gained a lot of weight from all the fast food, so that alone was karma. Then she met someone else and started sleeping there sometimes, but she messaged me often. Some days she was really upset at herself and claimed she missed me, but other days she was bitter and mean towards me for dumping her and leaving her without a dime. Sometimes I replied, but I never let her on or really cared about what she told me. All I wanted to do was distance myself from her. I'm really glad we didn't conceive children at this point because that would have been much more complicated. Gotta look at the bright side and focus on how happy you can be to have another chance at selecting a better mate. I found a house for sale through my coworker and I have him over for dinner and vice versa all the time. We became best friends in this process. Wow, Opie, I'm glad you had a coworker there with you who'd been through something similar and had good advice. I'm also glad your MIL backed up the fact your ex messed up by kicking her out. Your ex was not considering anyone but herself when she decided to start an affair with her friend. There are too many people in the world to break your spouse's heart just so you can offer yourself to someone else. They don't have to be with anyone who's in a relationship. Anyone can find someone new if they look in the right place. If anything was wrong in the relationship, it's the unhappy person's responsibility to communicate what the problem is. If they aren't sure what the problem is, they should start by telling their spouse that there is an unknown problem and describe how they feel at certain times. It can be something two people work together to diagnose and solve, but only if both are willing and mature enough to do it. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already.